So, steel structures. So, we will be discussing about the fire hazard predominantly in the two topics which we will be discussing in today's class. So, predominantly steel, you can see so many structures right now coming up with steel equivalent to concrete. So, in steel there are so many hazards available. Okay. So, you have impalement, abrasion hazards, and also during erection processes there is a primarily a fall hazard. With the fall hazard only you have impalement or abrasion, which we will discuss in today's class. And the major issue with regard to steel structures is especially in welding operations. Okay. You may have to do the connections predominantly with the help of rivet or bolts or other type of joints. So, now another issue is when you are having a bigger diameter reinforcement, okay, in the columns or in the footings, then you may not be able to overlap. Okay. It will be too congested. So, those places you may have to do welding. Okay. The only choice for you will be welding of the reinforcement rods. So, when you are bringing in welding operation, there are so many types of welding are available these days, and some of the welding are linked with electrical hazard and some of the welding are linked with fire hazard. Okay. Predominantly fire hazard. So, we will be discussing one type of welding operation in this class and the fire hazard with regard to that and the precautions wherein you can avoid easily the fire. So, this will be part of the today's class. Okay. And after then subsequently we will be discussing in elaborate the fire also. So, the fire protection, prevention mechanisms and how to handle fire in an upcoming structure. So, now let us begin the class. So, connections in structures. So, there are primarily three types. One is rivet, welds and butt joints. So, steel structure is used very widely in industrial, non-industrial buildings, towers, storage tanks and bridges, because it is very fast to complete. It has lot of strength and durability compared to a concrete structure. So, they can easily accommodate modifications also to support additional features. These are the major issues for which why steel is predominantly used. Safety in reinforcement work. There are so many issues. For example, you may do pre-stressing and post-stressing of operations, wherein the reinforcement rods are actually strengthened, okay, using a pre-stressing jack. So, there the primary hazard is snapping of wires. Okay. I am not discussing all the hazards with regard to steel, but few issues I am just bringing in, and primarily we will move on to welding operations only. So, flying rods is one of the other major hazard, especially when you do shear cuts from the shearing machine. These broken wires can fly at a terrific speed and can pierce through any person standing in the travel path. Okay. So, you can always have a stout shield behind the pre-stressing jack, so that the rods are not flying and they are safely collected. So, the major hazard with reinforcement is abrasion and impalement. Abrasion is nothing but scratching, primarily when you are handling the reinforcement while you are touching with your bare body onto the reinforcement. The surface of the reinforcement is not that smooth. So, you may have some sort of scratches or minor cuts, injuries and so on, which we generally call as an abrasion injury. And the other one is impalement. Okay. So, this picture will tell you what is an impalement. Accidentally you may fall into the reinforcement setups and you may have an impalement. So, you can see here there are a lot of injuries workers have suffered in the past due to impalement hazards. Okay. And what are the ways to avoid the impalement? A simple suggestion is try to keep bends in all the sharp corners. Okay. So, this is primarily a safe photograph for reinforcement. Even if some worker has fallen in, they will not have any impalement injury. Okay. So, impalement is piercing of the reinforcement rod into the worker's body. So, primarily if you see here, all the reinforcement are bent, so that there is no fall hazard, there is no injury with regard to impalement. The other, that is a safer way to do in sites. Other method is providing an anti-impalement cap. Okay. So, bends all the exposed rebar so that the ends are not upright. It is a natural way of protection. Otherwise, you can also guard all the protruding ends of the steel reinforcement bars with either by using caps or by using troughs. Okay, caps again there are two types, one is your mushroom cap or the scratch caps, and the other one is a square rebar cap, okay, which comes with a square flat base. Okay. So, these are all mushroom caps and this is primarily an square cap. And suppose if there are too many reinforcement and providing all these caps, sometimes it is not practically feasible, you can also set up wooden troughs like this. This is also one of the viable method. Okay. Collect all the reinforcements together and put a wooden trough so that even if a fall hazard happens, the worker is not injured too much. Okay. And sometimes even what happens is, even if you try to cap all these reinforcement rods with the weight of the fall, sometimes what happens is, even as you see here, all these caps try to get inside and so on. Okay. So, it may get displaced. So, better to choose a wooden trough, that is also one of the feasible method to do. Sometimes you may not be able to do any of these methods and your site is such a way that none of these methods will work out. Then what you can do, the least option, preferred option is try to paint them in a bright color so that it is visible from a distance away that there is a fall hazard, okay, fall hazard with regard to reinforcements. So, that you can still make the workers be aware of. Now, the major hazard with regard to steel is primarily gas cutting and welding operations. Okay. So, let us discuss about primarily on gas cutting and welding of mild steel plates and sections. So, this we call it as an oxyacetylene flame cutting and welding operations. Okay. So, these gas cutting and welding operations by oxyacetylene flame, it starts at 3000 degrees or so. So, it is very hot a place, and with such a heat, the two metals generally join together and become like one. So, now if you see what are the two gases generally used, one is oxygen, other one is acetylene. So, if you can see here, this is acetylene cylinder and this is an oxygen cylinder. Okay. And this oxygen is generally colorless, odorless and non-inflammable, and acetylene gas forms an explosive mixture when it comes in contact with the air, primarily which is rich in oxygen. Okay. So, this is how the setup looks like. Okay, let us discuss more about this. So, these places of welding operations, we call it as a hot work permit system, okay, because anywhere, any place there may be fire which can fly away and catch when it falls on some combustible material or flammable material, it can catch very soon a fire. So, these are all primarily called hot work areas, and whenever you have to do work related to this, you may have to get a hot work permit system, okay, which we also call PTW, which is permit to work system. So, this is HWP, which is hot work permit system. OSHA defines hot work as any work involving electric or gas welding, cutting, bracing or similar flame or spark producing operations. So, during the hot work, the sparks can fly literally and spread over a large area because of the heat and the temperature with which you are working, maybe in a closed cabin. So, it is very, very dangerous. So, and sparks starts flying and moving away. So, this makes impossible for grinders or welders, okay, primarily the operators who do this operation, to really look for and to concentrate on their welding operation and also to look for fires. Okay. So, that is why we have to have a hot work permit system. Purpose of the hot work permit system is to establish some control on welding and cutting operations using naked flame or producing sparks capable of igniting any combustible material in the surrounding areas, okay, when the work is going on. Some examples of hot work: grinding, sanding or sandblasting, metal on metal contact, metal on concrete contact, internal combustion engines, electric tools such as drills or saws. So, now let us discuss about safety of men and then we will move slow on into general safety precautions. So, what are the special qualifications required for operators? So, these operators of cutting and welding equipment should be only skilled worker, physically fit. Why physically fit is every time he should be safety conscious and also have presence of mind when he is on the job. Okay, with regard to any changing circumstance or any hazard, he should have the presence of mind to know to put off the fire and escape from the vicinity. Welders and gas cutters should be equipped with proper PPE, like for example gloves, starting from gloves, safety boots, aprons, hand shields, so proper safety helmet and so on. The safety goggles should be used for duties which are hazardous to eyes, for example drilling, cutting or welding. Accordingly, it should cover with proper lens and filtering lens as well. The clothing, it should be free from oil or grease, because easily it can catch fire, and it should not be having open pockets or trouser flaps and so on. The cutting or welding operators should not work alone or in any other area which is very close to a hazardous location. Maybe where all your flammable materials are stored, it is primarily treated as a hazardous location, and this welding operation should not be carried out in those places. Before any cutting operation is commenced, arrangements should be made to prevent all the cut off pieces from dropping into a place where there is possibility of starting a fire. Maybe you should cover the ground with a proper carpet and so on, so that these pieces are all collected in a safe place and gathered. Welding a rod or a bar to the piece to be cut off, securing the piece to a cut off with wire or a chain, or having a helper to hold the piece as soon as you start cutting it off. So, these are the three options you have primarily. So, PPE, it starts from welding helmet, okay, and a flame proof skull cap and eye safety shield. So, primarily we call it as a welder's helmet. It comes with a protective filter and an opaque shell. Then eye safety shields, this is what it is. Then dark flame proof clothing with full sleeves and neck fastenings, and leather apron on top of that, fire protection gloves, then you have full steel capped boots. So, these are the basic requirements of a PPE, and hard work permit system will not allow workers to enter if they do not wear any of these PPE. Now, general precautions before your welding and cutting operations: protective seat for operator. Most often what happens, these operators, they try to sit or kneel, or they use an empty kerosene tank or any other tank which are available in the vicinity, and they try to use it as a seat. Okay, so, always keep in mind, so those bins are not at all a seat. So, wet floors or floor covered with metallic sheets can always give electric shock. So, you have to be very careful. So, spillover of oil, grease, dirt or something on the floor can also ignite your fire. So, you should be very careful. So, clean the floor with which is away from your oil, grease, dirt, hot metal droplets, hot metal pieces, all should be cleaned from time to time. When welding or cutting is very close to a wooden construction, it shall be protected from direct heat, because that is also a combustible material. Okay. Now, work safety in gas cutting. So, your oxygen cylinder and acetylene cylinder should be stored separately, they should never be stored together, and the gas cylinders should preferably carried from the store to the place of work using trolleys or any other suitable means, maybe by using even cranes. It should be ensured these cylinders are chained, all valves are shut, regulators are also detached, and then there is no leakage, and then it should be taken off. Suppose if there is no separate place and they have to be stored together, then there should be at least a 5-foot barrier in between these two storage places. Cylinders should be kept also away from welding or cutting operations, or by using shields, then only the operations should carry on, and place these cylinders so that they will not also become part of the electrical circuit. Now, while you are transporting also, you should maintain all the safety precautions with regard to the cylinders. The cylinders should be chained properly, sealed and then taken off, and always carried in vertical position. Operators should note all apparatus will have the proper distinction mark. Generally they have a color code. So, red is primarily for acetylene and black or green is generally for oxygen, and they should follow those color code for identifying, okay, even along with the hoses. To start the gas cutting job, the acetylene controller should first slightly open the flame to see for any blocks in the nozzle and to see how the flame is coming out, and separately he should open both the hoses and then only he should together open the flames for the torch cutting. Okay. And also first the acetylene flame should be open, maybe it gives a black smoke in the end, but still it is always safe to open the acetylene flame first and then open the oxygen flame next. Okay. And always ensure that you have this nozzle here, okay, and there is something called a tip, and after then only the flame should start, okay, especially when you are having when you are igniting. Okay. So, because if you are allowing or permitting the fire to happen too close to the nozzle, then there can be chances of backfire happening. Okay. To start the gas cutting job, the acetylene controller should first be opened slightly to light the flame, and then the oxygen supply should be adjusted by opening the oxygen controller, and the blowpipe valve should be closed promptly to avoid all your backfires. Okay. No lifting by the valve protection caps. So, generally do not handle the cylinders with the help of the caps, okay, that is not at all a way to do. It has to be chained with some mechanism and then only it has to be lifted up. For example, this is the way to lift and not by the cap. Okay. So, especially when you are hoisting it by cylinders and securing in a cradle and when you are transporting it. So, use a cylinder truck to keep cylinders being knocked over, and while in use, so always it should be properly sealed and kept. Cylinders also should be secured upright position at all times and not like in a slanting or in a horizontal position. Valve protection caps should be always in place and never you should be opening it at any time. To move cylinders by hand, tilt them and roll them on their bottom edges. So, valves has to be closed when you are finished with the task, when cylinder is empty, and when you are moving the cylinders, at all these instances the valve has to be closed. General safety precautions. So, all the gas cylinders shall be used and stored in the upright position only and should be conveyed in trolleys or any other suitable means. While handling in cranes, they should be carried in cages, and the cylinders should be marked as full or empty, so that the operators are also aware of the hazard linked with those cylinders. Gas cylinders should be stored away from open flames and other sources of heat. Oxygen cylinders should never be stored near gas, oil, grease and other similar combustible materials. When the cylinders are in use, the cylinder valve key or wrench should be placed in position, and when the cylinder is moved, the valve should be always closed. All cylinder valves should be closed when the torches are being replaced or welding is stopped for some reason, and never lubricate the cap or anything, so that you are actually trying to open the cap. Okay. And also, when before starting the operation, when there is any spill of oil or grease on the cylinder, it should be wiped off clean, and then only the valves has to be open. Gas cutting and welding torches should be lighted by means of special lighters and not with matchbox and matchsticks. The cables from welding equipment should be placed in such a way that they are not run over by traffic, and immediately after the operation it has to be properly secured. Double earthing also is recommended to prevent electric shocks. The hoses should have proper color codes, and that should be known to the operator for easy handling and to avoid confusion and prevent fire and explosion hazards. The oxygen gas from the gas cylinder should not be used as a cooling agent in case of for venting out any naked flames. Good housekeeping and illumination should be ensured to prevent any fire mishaps happening in the site. In operating oxy fuel gas cutting apparatus, the oxygen pressure should be set appropriately to the same level and never try to overdo with those setups. An oxygen pressure greater than necessary will always generate lot of sparks, and which is really dangerous and we can catch fire. If the welders and assistants are not adequate, or they are not trained properly, or they are not able to be watchful in terms of handling the small fires, and in primarily we call it as a watch fires, then there should be a proper additional help or maybe a firefighting service there, so that they should be able to identify, detect fire, signal the other people properly, and action immediately to be taken in case of extinguishing the fire. So, all these has to be there. Now, what is this backfire and flashback? Backfire is return of the flame into the blowpipe with a loud or violent pop sound. So, primarily this is your nozzle, and there is a nozzle tip, and then you have the flame coming out, okay, and here you have the two hoses. Okay. So, this flame starts entering inside. Okay. So, that is primarily called as a backfire. Flashback is really more severe and potentially dangerous. Here the flame returns through the blowpipe into the hose, and what happens, it even moves to the cylinders and the regulators. Okay. So, it can go here, and if the operator is really watchful of the flashback, then he knows how to operate the regulators and prevent the flashback to happen. Okay. Primarily he can stop the exploding to happen. Suppose if he is not trained for all these unnecessary precautions and so on, then what happens is this fire can enter into the cylinder and it can explode. In this, the flame returns through the blowpipe into the hose and even regulators. It may reach even the fuel gas cylinder, causing the destruction of equipment, and easily it can explode. To prevent backfire or flashback occurring, the oxygen control valve on the blowpipe should be closed quickly, because oxygen is the only one which will supply the air for the flames to happen. If there is suspicion that the fire has reached the regulators, both the regulators shall be taken off, and after backfire or flashback is over, then after maybe even after 60 minutes or something, you may have to really check whether anything has happened by immersing the blowpipes into a bucket of water, and you have to really check for presence of any fire still existing, then only you have to restart the operation. So, it shall be ensured flashback or backfire has been quenched properly before relighting the blowpipe. Some more precautions. The main reason is feeding of high pressure gas into the low pressure line, forming a high combustible mixture through which the flame can propagate at a very high speed. So, this can happen with several reasons. So, these backfire or something can happen if the nozzle is partially blocked, control valves are not fully closed or leaking, incorrect pressure settings, overheating of the blowpipe and so on. Okay. And whenever the nozzles are damaged or defective, they should not be used. When you are working on heavily scaled material, the surface has to be cleaned prior to welding and or cutting to prevent scales flying off and blocking the tip nozzle. So, always that is where before you start the operation, you have to blow off both the pipes one after the other to check for the flow of air coming out. Okay. Only when you identify that there is nothing blocking the nozzle and the hose, then only you are supposed to start the welding operation. And additional even after all these precautions, still fire may happen. Okay. So, in case of fire happening, then you may have to have a sufficient firefighting apparatus and equipment, so that you are actually putting off the fire. So, ample supply of dry sand in suitable containers should be placed. Hoses connected to an effective water supply also should be available, and so that you can put off the fire. All persons concerned should be instructed and trained wherever necessary in using efficiently all the equipment and devices, starting from firefighting and other devices. Detection of fire. So, what happens is generally the fire starts in a small at a small pace only. Okay. So, if you put all your measures in putting off those small flames, then it does not spread. The minute the fire starts spreading, it becomes like too much for you to control the fire, because its spontaneous reaction starts happening. So, there should be watch fire person, okay, allotted by the hot work permit system itself. So, during that system itself we should identify who are all the watch fire personals, and they should be really looking for all these small fires which are or the sparks which are spreading on out of your welding operation, okay. And you should be trying to put off all these small flames instantaneously before it spreads off into a very wide fire explosion. Signaling of fire alarm. So, the first impulse of many individuals on discovering a fire is to try to extinguish. Suppose if you are not trying to extinguish, then you are supposed to inform without any delay through an alarm system to all the person inside the site to inform that there is a fire which has blown out. The fire protection procedure should be set up if there is to be flame cutting, burning, heating, forging, riveting operation that could start a fire. The worker should be instructed not to throw loose objects or scrap like hot rivets, cigarette stubs, etc. around, which are primarily substances for igniting the fire. Wherever possible, non-combustible material should be used for false work, storing or temporary construction. Inflammable materials like petrol, kerosene or liquid oxygen should be stored with proper care. All erection staff, primarily with the steel erection, because we are discussing in terms of steel, should be explained the risk of fire. The safe distance between the flammable material and the working place should be decided by the competent authority, and generally the safe distance is not less than 15 meters. In conducting your welding and cutting operations, especially when you are close to hazardous locations, try to barricade or guard those hazards, and then maybe you put a thick fire shield and then start doing all your operations. Okay. So, this content was taken from all these references. So, these are primary for your fire precautions, cutting and welding in fire precautions, and these references are for general steel erection, which includes crane operations and fall hazards and so on. Okay. So, with this the topic on steel and your welding operations is over. We will continue with fire hazard. So, what is a fire? So far we have discussed fire can happen. So, even in electrical safety we have discussed fire is one of the hazard, and in your steel welding and cutting operations there also fire is a major hazard. So, what is this fire and how to take care of? Okay, if you look at all the disasters known so far, like for example flood, hurricanes or typhoons, earthquake and so on, all these are considered as as a natural hazard. The only one man-made hazard is, we call it as a fire. Okay. Fire does not happen naturally, and when the three things are generally put together, then fire always happens. Okay. So, what are the three things? The three things are your fuel, oxygen and heat. Okay. Primarily you need a heat, hot medium for the fire to be ignited. You also need some supply of fuel, it can come in any form, and you need oxygen, primarily the air. Okay. So, which will be igniting immediately a fire. So, there are so many types of fire classification, A, B, C, D and F and K. So, A is primarily ordinary combustible, wood, paper, cloth and so on. B is flammable liquids, grease, oil, paint, solvents and etc. C is live electrical equipment, electrical panel, motor, wiring and so on. D combustible metal, magnesium, aluminum and so on. And the last one is commercial cooking equipment, all your cooking oil, animal fats and vegetable oils all will fall under this category. Now, when you want to take efforts in putting out the fire, the easiest means is try to cut off any one of the three sources. Okay. Only when the three sources are coming together, fire can easily happen. So, if you want to put off the fire or if you want to prevent fire from occurring, so you have to either stay away from oxygen, in the sense do not give any supply of oxygen, or primarily we call it as a starvation process, or do not produce do not allow heat to be accumulating in a place, so that fire will not happen. So, like this try to take off one of the source, so that fire generally does not occur. So, how do we do? If you look at fire safety, many of the completed buildings, hotels or any construction, generally follow all fire safety norms, okay, and you will see lot of fire safety norms available for completed construction, okay, and you will find very few material or maybe even very less material on fire hazard, especially when it comes to an ongoing construction, okay. So, if you see a new building, assessment includes not only the location of the structure, but also the other buildings which are in close proximity to the structure which you are building it. So, the easy way is avoid one of the three sources to prevent a fire. Now, let us discuss one after the other. Ignition. So, look for possible sources of heat that could get hot enough to ignite a metal found in the site. For example, naked flame, plant and equipment fuel, vehicle exhaust, electrical, for example, faulty or misused electrical equipment, poor electrical installations, or heating from bunched cables, damaged cables, hot work and so on. These are all sources of ignition which we see, which can actually ignite a fire. So, there is probably a source of ignition there. Fuel, anything that can burn in a site is generally called a fuel for a fire. And if you see in construction site, many of the material that you use in construction sites are all susceptible to burn, okay, which will all burn very easily. Only one suggestion is reduce those quantity of material on the site at least, and do not try to store too much of those category of material in the site. Examples include composite panels, timber, rubbish, flammable liquids like paint, varnishes, scaffold sheets, volatile flammable substances like paints, thinners and so on, fuel for portable equipment or your LPG. So, all these are fuel for the ignition. The last is oxygen. Air around us will give you enough supply of oxygen. Wind or the chimney effect can actually increase the feed of oxygen or the fuel to fire. And when you are using oxidizing agents in the site, you have to use safely and store it carefully. So, how to reduce risk of fire? Avoid wherever people are gathering, do not try to store these substances which can cause fire in those vicinity. Suppose if you know the construction site in a particular locality has more people gathering in, so you have to keep an alternate storage for storing all your oxidizing agents, flammable substances and so on. So, you have to plan your site accordingly. The way the site is managed may affect the precautions you may need to put in place. So, you may also have to think of fire precautions well in advance. Sometimes you may also have to think of fire precautions while designing itself. Okay. So, designers have to specify permanent fire protection such as star enclosure should be constructed as early as possible, so that it can serve as a means of escape while constructing the building. Okay. So, best suggestion is try to put permanent stairs well in advance, so that you can avoid all the falls from the scaffolds. You can also use it as an escape route in case of fire. So, generally these fire mitigation methods are installed once the building is constructed. If as and when it possible, if you can install all the fire mitigation methods like fire detectors, fire suppression systems and so on, will reduce the risk on fire. So, ensure any action you take in terms of reducing the fire hazard should not substitute another hazard or should not aggravate another hazard. Primarily when you are working on electrical, mechanical and gas equipment, it should be stored with all manufacturer's instructions. All routine hot works, okay, what we call welding, cutting operations, should be done in a designated area away from combustible materials and also away from main structure which you are constructing, so that you are not encouraging fire happening in the building. Strictly control the hot processes or hot work by operating permit to work schemes, and check all areas where hot work has been carried out at regular intervals of for 1 hour after work has finished, to ensure no ignition has taken place and no smoldering or hot materials remain that may cause a fire. So, smoldering is not an fresh fire, or primarily it comes with a blackish shade or it looks like an ash form, but it still has the heat, okay, hidden beneath. That is primarily called smoldering. Remove or reduce sources of fuel. So, you can substitute materials with less flammable materials. Plan to reduce storage in only by just in time ordering. Okay, don't try to keep too much of all these flammable materials stored in your work site. So, keep all these materials in a designated storage places and where it is earmarked or planned in the layout. Do not keep all these flammable solids, liquids and gases together, and also these areas should be properly well lit and ventilated. And best advice is to do compartmentation, to instead of having walls like general brick walls and fire and primarily load bearing walls and partitioning walls, it is also advisable to think of fire resistance walls. Okay. So, you can think of compartmentation and try to store all these materials inside the structure itself, which is very safe for the for as a storage purpose. Other one is rubbish disposal. So, small clearances of these rubbish from the site can also prevent fire. For example, more than the real timber or something, the dust or scrap from the timber, especially when you are doing carpentry work, that can be more combustible compared to the timber itself. Okay. So, you have to understand, so the scrap or the debris of your either demolished site or the new construction is primarily a source of fire to catch fast. So, maybe you have a plan of daily throwing off all your scrap away from the site, so that you do not allow give a chance for fire to happen. Permit to work system, this is primarily for hot work surfaces including fire. So, all hot work generating heat, sparks or flames can cause a fire. So, when a hot work is not carried out too often, so the risk of fire is very low. So, you need not have a formal well laid policy on how to do the fire those as tasks. Suppose if you have to do these type of works very frequently and you have to do continuously, then you may have to have a well laid permit to work system in place. Okay. So, we should also include the location and nature of the hot work intended, the proposed time and duration of the work, limits of time for which the permit is valid, and the person who is in direct control of the work. All these should be identified. Precautions in the permit to work system before, during and after the work includes cleaning the surrounding area of all loose combustible material, try to collect all the scrap and keep it in a separate place which is really safe for disposal. Having suitable extinguishers in hand before you start your work, and a careful watch, primarily a fire watch maintained for fire during the work and following completion. Protecting all the combustible material which cannot be cleared, and examining the hot work area thoroughly for some time even after the work is completed, and so at least 1 hour. Okay, even after the work is completed, you have to look for visible watch fires there. Reducing potential fuel sources. So, primarily your flammable combustible materials all should be stored separately, and number one is do not try to store too much of this material in an ongoing construction site. Dangerous substances can put people's life at risk from fire and explosion. So, the amount of material kept on the site which can burn should be minimized, that is the easiest way to handle. So, just in time delivery will always meet the purpose. So, order the goods which are required for that particular 2 or 3 days in advance only, and do not store the materials too much. Construction work can alter the flammability of substances, and if storage outside the structure is not possible, internal storage should be maintained. And when you are trying to do internal storage, so you have to have a partition wall which should have at least 30 minutes of fire resistance. Okay. So, you should have good quality plaster board, will usually achieve this and can be very good for constructing small internal stores. And when you are keeping a storage, there should be a door which is also fire resisting and self closing. Good ventilation is primarily ensured, and openings for all these storage places should be 1% of total floor and wall area when you are storing flammable liquid storages. Volatile flammable materials has to be stored inside the building for security purposes. So, any building which is used only for storage purpose of all these volatile flammable materials should be separate from the normal construction work. Okay. And this building should be fire resisting and it should be in a safe location. Whatever form the storage area takes place, it should generally have 2 exits, and both should be unlocked when any person has entered into the storage area. Okay. Suppose if the nearest exit location is just 12 meters, you can just go ahead with only one exit, but whenever any person has entered in the storage area, then it has to be opened first and kept it open till the person comes out. Okay. And as soon as the person has exited, the doors should be properly closed. And small quantities of LPG do not store more than 300 kgs. It should be kept in a lockable wire cage with only one exit, and small quantities only up to 50 liters of flammable material such as paint, solvents, petrol, adhesives shall be stored. Do not store anything other than flammable materials in a flammable material store, and avoid accident spillage of all these materials, and you may have to do a proper housekeeping. Okay. Never store LPG cylinders in unventilated metal boxes even for a temporary accommodation. So, always store oxygen cylinders separate from the cylinders of flammable gases like LPG and acetylene. Now, in case, so these are primarily precautions. Now, if fire happens, how to put off the fire, and first of all how to detect a fire, that is the number one issue here. So, we have to discuss about fire detectors and fire extinguishers. Fire detectors, generally in an ongoing construction, fire detectors are not that prominently seen. Okay. Generally fire detectors are not that easily seen in any of a new construction. So, aim of any fire warning system is to ensure people on the site are really safe and they have to escape, okay, because fire is a life threatening issue. Essential requirements of fire warning signal are that it is distinctive, clearly audible and so on, and it is also recognized by all the people on the site. Okay. So, now what happens is, in a very small open site, word of mouth is generally like an alarm system. In majority of the sites, they have a little upgraded system of fire alarms, which is primarily an walkie-talkie sort of system or wired in system to just give sounders or signals or caution points that fire has occurred and they have to evacuate the room. Okay. The next is fire extinguishers. Fire extinguishers should be kept wherever you have a hot work in place. Okay. So, if you look at fire put off mechanisms, there are two ways of fire put off. One is active system, other one is a passive system. Active system is after the fire has happened, you primarily try to put off the fire. So, it comes in terms of fire sprinklers. So, this is primarily the fire sprinklers. So, these are the fire sprinklers, okay, and this is hydrants, this is the fire heel hose. Okay, and these are all your fire extinguishers. So, based on the classification of the fire, you can use water, you can use foam, you can use powder for putting off the fire. There are a lot of ways of putting off the fire. So, now these are primarily a quick way of putting off the fire, which we call it as an active system. The next one is passive system. Passive systems generally try to seal off the fire without spreading the fire. Okay. Active system will not try to suppress the fire, but it just puts off the fire through a forced manner, okay, mechanism. In passive, it tries to conceal or seal. So, there are so many ways again here. Number one is fire door. So, this is primarily used for an exit, but it also seals in the this is fire door. It also seals in the fire inside the particular room itself, okay, and this is called smoke curtains. Okay. The minute the fire happens, okay, so either by manual means or automatic means, so these sensors can smell the smoke and it can tries to put off and seal the complete building, so that the smoke or fire is not transferred outside. Okay. This is moldable putty. These are the sealants which are available for putting off the fire, and this is primarily a fire retardant paint. Okay. So, one case I can discuss wherein fire can be easily prevented by using this putties. Okay. There was an incident which happened 5-6 years back in one of the regions in Delhi only. So, what happened is the fire spread through the complete building because there were lot of service lines which were not sealed completely. Okay. So, these service lines are generally sealed only after the building is completely constructed. Okay. So, during the course of normally in any construction company they do not emphasize on sealing these holes. Now, what happens is, so through these holes the smoke and other air starts coming out through this hole, it starts spread from room to room. Okay. It starts spread from floor to floor, room to room, and the fire, that is how it spreads very easily. Okay. If you can put an moldable putty or maybe even a mortar is a very good way of sealing up the smoke inside a room. Only that particular room may get damaged, but it does not spread to the other rooms and other neighboring places. The other setups are fire pump rooms. Okay. So, this is primarily a site with primarily a metro construction site where they have even a mobile fire extinguishers also in place, which is helpful for putting off the fire. Okay. So, underground excavation are more prone to fire because they may have flammable gases, toxic gases and so on. So, you may have to have a well set up, a proper setup for putting off the fire. So, they even have a mobile or a mobile extinguisher van, okay, in underground sites. This is some of the good practices. So, wherever you see that places is more susceptible to fire, they are all barricaded and not allowed for people to enter. This is primarily inspection of fire extinguishers which is happening. So, all these flammable materials are all stored in a godown and they are all kept safely away from the ongoing construction site. Emergency plans. So, the other issue is you may also have to think of safeguarding the people and apart from putting off the fire. So, emergency escape plans that we have to discuss. So, before even you think of fire suppression, you may have to think of emergency plans. Suppose if you are thinking of evacuating the people through scaffolds, you should not be thinking of timber planks for the scaffold. Okay. You should have a material which is really fire resistant. So, all these has to be brought in mind. Okay. That is where I said while designing itself you should be putting in your fire safety measures from that point of time itself when you are thinking of. Okay. So, this is primarily a site where they use scaffolds and this permanent stairs as a means of emergency escape mechanism, and these stairs and other means also had lot of sprinklers. Okay. So, that the fire can be easily put off. So, the plan, even this emergency plan should be based on the outcome of fire risk assessment. What is the choice of material, what type of structure is going on. So, all these matters, and it should be available to the workers, contractors, subcontractors and anyone who is involved in the project. And this emergency plan should be made available before the work starts, and any control measures identified should be integrated with other work procedures, for example, scaffolds, electrical work, welding work and so on, so that it is all well linked together, and any measure that you take today may not work out later on. Sometimes what happens is the scaffold planks are really fire are prone to fire, then it is not a safe means for evacuating the workers if you have identified it as a safe means of making the workers come out. Careful consideration has to be given to the means of escape from work areas above or below the ground level. So, it is especially important to ensure stairways and ladders are located or protected, so that they are free from obstacles, and it should be clearly marked for evacuation, and it should not be also it should be totally fire resistant. So, those planning the project should consider evacuation routes as part of the process and ensure that staircases are provided in preference to ladders where reasonably practical. So, doors, revolving doors are not considered for fire protection, and for similar reasons also sliding doors, the doors should be open from the inside so that the workers can escape out, and it should not be locked or closed. Okay. So, these doors should be easily and immediately openable from the escape side, other than searching for a key and and opening the lock and so on. And check out the doors that should be maintained and properly closed properly and properly opened. Adequate stairways should be constructed from scaffolds or using appropriate system. So, you have to have a proper means of thinking on that. Suppose if these issues happens in the dark, emergency escape lights also has to be provided in addition to these precautions in terms of escape routes, so that the people are able to escape safely. And whenever the workers are escaping, so the workers should also be aware of all your signages, in the sense routes and means of escaping. So, there should be proper firefighting signs and also evacuation signs. I think while we were discussing about signs, signals and barricades, we have discussed all these at that point of time itself. So, these should be identified, and immediately after coming out of the building or escaping out of the building, they should be known where is the assembly area. Okay. Primarily it is an assembly point. So, that should be identified. In small sites, a pavement outside may be adequate. Suppose if you have a very large site, arrangements has to be made, maybe in place of a car park, or you should choose a designated place which is away from the hazard, and you are able to evacuate the workers safely. Okay. So, suppose if the site is, suppose if this area is outside the site, then those particular gate should be open, it should be allowing the workers to quickly escape from these particular places. Okay. So, escape routes has to be clearly marked and identified. Next is emergency evacuation drills. Most of the time what happens is the workers start getting panicked, okay, when some incident or some hazards outbreaks. So, especially in terms of fire. So, since fire is a man-made hazard, so these workers should be trained of how to take care of themselves and escape from the fire hazard. And the one easy way to do is emergency evacuation drill, okay, which we normally call it as a fire drill. So, fire drill should be happening wherein they actually create a fire and make these workers to escape out and then put off the fire. So, that instead of training through an theoretical form, it is actually done in a practical form. Okay. Now, these workers are used to coming in and entering out of the same structure every day and now and then. So, they know how to enter, how to come out and so on. So, even when some hazard happens, in the sense fire breaks out, the workers will be very clear on how to come out of the hazard and how to put off the fire. So, these fire drills happen, it depends on the site, sometimes it happens once in a month, sometimes it happens 6 months in once. So, recap to everything. So, fire is very dangerous, and although it is a man-made hazard, so it is easy to think of where the hazard can exist, and you can still try to even if fire happens, it should not be affecting person or damaging the structure. For example, more than lives of the people, you can see here all these photographs shows how much damage has happened. Okay. So, this is primarily a godown, and the complete godown has totally gone off with the help of fire. This is also an ongoing construction worker shed which caught fire and total structure got damaged. Okay. So, primarily small issues like this, okay, not properly closing the service lines or hydrants and so on, all these can trigger off the fire. So, you have to be very careful, and most of these issues are unsafe acts only. Okay. This is also an example for unsafe act. For example, if you see here, all the cylinders are stored in a horizontal manner, lying here and there one after the other. So, these are not the ways of storing of all these cylinders. So, if the workers are trained properly and they are made cautious on how to take care of the fire precautions, then you can easily put off the fire. Okay. So, I have taken all this material from all these references. So, thank you.